Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Patience. So today we're going to be making this ruched dress that is really easy. Before we get started, kindly click the subscribe button. If you have done that, let's get into it. So I'll be using this beautiful fabric for this tutorial, and I'll also use this lining on the dress. So this is my shoulder line, and I'll start my measurements from this line. The first measurement I'm going to take is my shoulder measurement, which is 16 inches divided by 2, that is 8 plus half, that is 8.5 inches. So I'll go ahead and mark 8.5 inches, and from the 8.5 inches I'll come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant. And then I'll mark half of my armhole measurement, which is 8 inches. So I'll bring down my shoulder measurement on this line and connect it this way. The next measurement I'll be taking is my shoulder to bust measurement. That is 10.5 inches. So I'll mark 10.5 inches and connect it. Then I'll take my shoulder to waist measurement, which is 17.5 inches. Then I'll add ½ inch that I'll use to join it to the lower part of the dress. So the next measurement I'm going to take is my bust span measurement, which is the distance from one nipple to another. Mine is 8 inches divided by 2 is 4 inches plus ½ inch, that's 4.5 inches. So I'll mark 4.5 inches on my bust line and my waist line. On the bust line, I'll come down by 1 inch and I'll connect the points. So I'll be using 1 inch for my dart. So I'll go ahead and mark ½ inch on both sides and create my dart. I'm taking my circumference measurements. My bust circumference is 42 inches divided by 4 is 10.5 inch. I'll mark 10.5 inch and I'll add 1.5 inch for sewing allowance. Do the same thing on this line. And then my waist circumference is 36 inches divided by 4 is 9 inches. Then I'll be adding 1 inch for my dart. That is 10 inches. So I'll mark 10 inches and 1.5 inch for sewing allowance. So to create my armhole, I'll mark the midpoint of this line, which is 4 inches. So from the 4 inches, I'll come in by ½ inch. And from the ½ inch, I'll create my back armhole. And then for the front armhole, I'll come in by 3/4 inch. And then from the 3/4 inch, I'll make a curve for my front armhole. So for the neck, I'll be using about 4 inch for the width of the neck. And I'll be using 3.5 inch for the depth of the neck. So I'll add ½ inch on the shoulder line for my shoulder, for the sewing allowance. After doing that, I'll cut it out, and I'll cut out the back armhole first. So I'll use the front piece as a pattern to cut out the back. I left 1 inch for zipper allowance. I'll place the front piece this way. I'll make sure it's aligned and I'll trace it out. So after cutting the back armhole, I'll cut out the front armhole. So my front and back piece are ready. Now I'll be cutting out the lower part. So I'll be using this line as my waistline because my fabric is not enough. So from the waistline, I'll mark my hip point, which is as my waist to hip measurement, which is 9 inches. I'll add ½ inch to join to the upper part, that's 9.5 inches. So the full length of this dress is 45 inches. So I used 17 inches on the upper part, and I'll be using 28 inches on this lower part. So I'll go ahead and mark 28 inches. And then I'll add 2 inch for hemming allowance, that is 28 and 30 inches. So my waist circumference is 36 inches. Quarter of 36 inches is 9 inches, so I'll go ahead and mark 9 inches, and I'll add 1.5 inch for sewing allowance. So my hip circumference is 44 inches. Quarter of my hip circumference is 11 inches, but I'll be adding 1 inch for ease, that is 12. So I'll mark 12 inches and 1.5 inch for sewing allowance. So on the hemline, I'll be adding extra 2 inches on quarter of my hip circumference, which is 11 inches plus 2, that is 13 inches, and I'll add 1.5 inch for sewing allowance. So I'll connect the points. So I'll be making a ruche on one side of the front piece. So I'll be taking my bust span measurement from the waist down to the hemline. So I'll cut this out, and I'll be using it as a pattern to cut out the back piece. So I left 1 inch for zipper allowance. I'll make sure they're aligned, and I'll cut it out. So I'll make sure I notch the hip. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to join the back piece together. That is the upper part of the back piece and the lower part. So if you have been following my videos, you will know I always take my back half length on the back piece so that I can take my zip tightening to avoid zip bulge. So I'll go ahead and do that. And this is longer because of the darts. So my back half length is 15 inches. So you can use ½ inch or 3/4 inch for your zip tightening. So I'll go ahead and make a slant for my zip tightening, and I'll divide the back piece into 2. Remember, I'm still going to take my 1 inch for the zipper allowance. So I used the back piece as a pattern to cut out the lining, but on the lower part, I made the lining shorter. So the length of the lining I used is 17 inches, and I added 2 inch for hemming allowance. So now I'll be joining the neckline. I'll go ahead and place good side of the fabric and good side of the lining together, and I'll start sewing from the 1 inch for the zipper allowance. After fixing my zip, I'll finish up the neckline. So I'll do the same thing for the back piece and the front piece, and I'll be sewing very close. So after joining the neckline, I'll also take in my darts on the front piece and the back piece separately on the fabric and the lining. So I've done that and made sure I ironed it. As you can see how it came out. Also taking in my darts. And I also took in my dart on the back piece. Remember, I did not finish up the neckline. I'll attach my zip before I finish it up. So that is it. So the next thing I'm going to do is to join the front and the back shoulders together. So I'll go ahead and align it this way. I'll make sure the lining are together and the fabric are together. So I'll pin it down and sew on the 1/2 inch I left for sewing allowance. So I've done that and I make sure they're aligned. So remember, this is my bust span measurement. So I cut out this piece of fabric that is 30 inches and this is 3 inches. So I marked the midpoint, which is 1.5 inches all through. What I'm trying to do is to create a casing for the strap that will pass through the ruched I want to make on one side of the lower part of the front piece. So I'll go ahead and fold each side to the 1.5 inch this way and I'll iron it. So for the strap, I will use 1.5 inches. So I marked the midpoint all through. So the length of the strap is times 2 of 30 inches. That is 60 inches. I'll be making 2 of it. So also I'll fold it this way and fold it again and stop stitch it. So I've done that and this is how it came out. So also on the casing I've ironed it and I also marked where I'm going to stitch. So I'm going to place the midpoint of the casing on the bust span line. I'll make sure they're aligned and I'm going to stitch on the sides, both sides, and then stitch the middle. So I'll start sewing from the waist and I'll stop at the hemline because I'll be hemming the lower part. So I'll stop at the hemline before I complete it. So I'll pin it down first and sew it. So I've done that. I first stitch on the sides and then I stitch the middle. So this is how it came out and this is how it is on the good side. So now I'll pass the strap through the casing using a safety pin on both sides of the casing. So I've done that, and this is how it came out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to join the front piece together, good sides facing each other. I'll go ahead and pin it down, and also on the 1/2 inch I left for joining allowance. I'll also join the back piece. So I'll be joining the fabric and the lining separately. So I've done that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to join the front and the back piece together separately on the lining and the fabric. So I'll place good sides on each other, I'll pin it down and sew on the 1.5 inch. So I've done that, and I made sure the waists are aligned. And this is how neat it came out. So the next thing I'm going to do is to join good sides together, that is on the fabric, and I'll mark where my zip will stop, that is 21 inches. And I'll be sewing from the 21 inches up down to the hemline. So I'll go ahead and pin it down first and sew it. So I'll do the same thing on the lining. I'll mark the 21 inches where my zip will stop, and I'll sew the remaining part. So I've done that, and the next thing is to fix my zip. So I'll turn it to the wrong side, and just on the fabric I'll place good side of the zip and good side of the fabric together, and I'll pin it down on the 1 inch I left for zipper allowance and sew both sides of the zip. And when I'm attaching the zip, I'll ensure the waist and the neck are aligned. So I've done that, and the next thing I'm going to do is to finish up the neckline, and I'll be sewing on the zip. So I've done that, and I'm just going to cut out the remaining zip. So the next thing I'm going to do is to join the lining and the fabric together. So I'll be sewing very close to the zipper teeth. So I'll pin it down first and sew it very close. So I've done that, and I also hemmed the lower part with the 2-inch I left for hemming allowance. So this is how it is on the back. Also on the lining, I hemmed the lower part, and this is how it is on the back of the lining. Now for the sleeve, I have a detailed video on how to draft a basic sleeve. So the only thing I did here was to extend the wrist. The length of the sleeve is 23 inches and I added hemming allowance. So depends on how wide or how open you want the wrist. So I made mine 10 and I added 1.5 inch for side seam allowance. So what I did was just to connect it to the bicep line, and that is it. So I've traced it on my fabric, and I had to join this black fabric because my fabric is not enough. So I've also ironed in the hemming allowance. So I'm just going to join the side seam allowance and attach my sleeve. So I've done that. I've attached my sleeve. So I left this opening that I'll pass my elastic band through. So I'll just go ahead and measure how I want my elastic band, and I'll use the safety pin to pass it through. After passing it through, I'll sew both ends of the elastic band and close up the opening. So I am also going to put this on the mannequin to show you guys how it came out. Like, if you have not subscribed to my channel, what are you waiting for? Guys, kindly give this video a thumbs up, click on the subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell to be updated when I upload a new video. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.